Hi, good morning. Welcome back. Now, this Heritage Softail Classic came to me with 30,000 miles and the typical patchwork service history. Now, that's not to say there's anything missing. It has had a service on cue at the relevant mileage, and I'm very happy about that. But it does need a service now, and it needs a major service at this point. So that's why I'm going through every single one of the fluids on the bike, front to back, before I deal with anything physical that it might have wrong with it. So having done the oil and filter change, including a purge, the gearbox oil change, the primary oil change, and a clutch adjustment while I was in there, today there are still two fluids unchanged, and that's the brake fluid, front and rear, and the fork oil. So today we'll crack on with that and make a start on the front brake fluid. Simple little task, but there's always a few things to pass on, if I may, and hopefully you'll enjoy the video. Now, fair enough, I know I've done 1,000 brake fluid changes on this channel over 14 years, but honestly, it never gets old. Having to do it never gets old, and it is one of the most neglected of the service procedures because it's not on mileage. If you look at the mileage schedule, what's necessary, it tells you oil and filter and plugs and valve clearances on other bikes and all that sort of thing, but it never mentions brake fluid, clutch fluid if you have that. It always leaves that to a 2-year periodic. It doesn't matter whether your bike's done no mileage at all and it's sat in the shed. Every 2 years you should still be changing the .4 style brake fluid. .5 not so much, but .4, which this bike is, always needs to be done. And it so often isn't done because it doesn't say to do it on your 5,000 mile service. So the water content builds up in the fluid and you start getting problems. And every single bike I've ever bought, when I test the .4 fluid with my water content tester, invariably, every single time, they fail the water content test. Even if it's only been done a year before. If you ride in the rain, you should be changing your brake fluid every 12 months at the very latest. So here we are. Let's check this one and see if this is true to form and it actually fails the water content test. All right, first, just protect the paint from any splashes. All right. Screwdriver. And just prepare somewhere nice and clean to lay the cap. Now, if we turn this over and take a little look in there, here these little droplets you see and the wetness around the inside, that's not brake fluid. That's condensation. Those are little tiny water droplets that collect there from the obvious water content that's going to be in that fluid. So it's not looking good. Right. And the tester pen. There it is. All right, now this little gadget is what you can use to test for water content. I'll show you how it works. Right, we take a little base cap off first, and there's 2 electrodes. Now you dip these into your brake fluid, and given that brake fluid doesn't conduct electricity as well as water, the more water content in your brake fluid, the better it conducts electricity, obviously. So when you press the button and you put those into the fluid, it will measure the conductivity between the 2 tips, and it will show on a little scale here. And if it measures more than 2%, that means you've got more than 2% water in your brake fluid, and that's too much. So therefore, it goes up to 3%, the red light comes on, and it fails. Right, 2 questions that we usually get with this is where does the water actually come from? How does it get in there? The cap was done up nice and sealed. Well, as you may know, brake fluid itself, .4, is hydroscopic. So therefore it absorbs moisture from the atmosphere like a sponge, just humidity, and eventually it builds up to a level where it's too much. And secondly, how is a little bit of water content a problem? Well, it certainly is, because in the first sense, it can corrode some of the internals inside your braking system, and more importantly, the water content will wick throughout the fluid. Although it's coming in through the cap, it will end up down in the caliper. It will just work its way down over time. And once you've got water content in the fluid that's in the brake caliper, remember how hot that gets when you're braking, and therefore that will turn into steam, and there you get a steam jacket on the back of the piston, the brake piston, and effectively that causes the brakes to go spongy and you get brake fade in extreme cases. So it's all bad. You must change the brake fluid because it mustn't have any water content in it more than about 1 or 2%. So, moment of truth, let's test what that brake fluid is like. Okay, ready? Dip it all the way in. There, true to form, absolutely waterlogged. Now, in a recent video, I showed how to bleed brake fluid in 3 separate ways. And as I love to keep things simple, today I'm just going to use a jam jar, a plastic tube and a spanner. The simplest way of all. Standard bleed down method. And brand new, fresh, sealed, unopened brake fluid as well. Now, whilst I've already said that the water content in your brake fluid will wick its way down through it and it will end up in the caliper, the majority of it will still be up here in the reservoir. So rather than pump this highly contaminated waterlogged fluid down through the system, I'm going to suck that out first. Just get rid of it, suck it out with a syringe, then put fresh, clean fluid in there and pump that down through instead of that mucky old stuff. Right, brand new bottle, unopened. Seal. And I know you're wondering this. Straight in. A brand new bottle of brake fluid, freshly opened, has 1% water content. Who knew? All right, top her up. Right, perfect opportunity to make this point. I went to use the little ring spanner to undo that, ready to start bleeding it, and it just wouldn't have it. It started to slip. So I used a 6-sided 3/8 socket, just about got it to crack free. You saw how that snapped loose. Well, that's because it was over tightened, and it's so common to find bleed valves over tightened. Honestly, there's no need to do it. There's a little tapered seat at the bottom. They just need nipping up gently, and they're absolutely fine. They won't leak. It's when you do them up too tight, you can enter into a world of problems 2 years down the line where they've corroded and they're over tight. And remember, it might look like it's 8 millimeters thick, that bleed valve, but it's a tube, isn't it? It's got a hole down the middle, so there's no metal in the middle bit. So it's actually very weak. It's no stronger than a 6mm bolt. And imagine trying to break that free with a big ratchet. It's going to snap it clean off and you're in a world of pain. So honestly, don't over tighten bleed valves, whatever you do. Now I think you know this bit, pull the lever in, open, close valve, let the lever out, etc. Let's just get on with it. Okay, a few questions that might crop up. The fluid there was nice and clear and golden. It wasn't black and inky like it often can be. Why is that? Why wasn't it black, and yet it was still waterlogged? Well, the black comes from the rubber seals inside the cylinder. You have the piston that runs up and down inside the cylinder. Those rubber seals wear and you get black dust coming off them. If you haven't got any, it means they're not wearing. If you have got black in your brake fluid, it means that those seals are marching through their service life. You need to be mindful of that, keep an eye on them, and you might need to rebuild the master cylinder in the future. But if you haven't got any like that bike, then obviously the seals in there are fine. They're still waterlogged, but just without the rubber dust in it. Another question often asked is, what do you do if you have twin disc? Which one do you do first? Generally speaking, the general rule is you do the one furthest away from the master cylinder first, then the one that's closest. Another question asked is, what about storing pre-opened, half-used bottles of fluid on the shelf? Do I have to throw that out? Can I keep it and use it in the future? Depends on your garage. If your garage is nice and dry, like mine is, then yep, do it up nice and tight, put it on the shelf. It should be absolutely fine. I've got a bottle on the shelf over there. It's got 1%. It's showing when I dipped it, and that's been open about 9 months. Absolutely fine in a dry garage. But if your garage is a bit damp and a bit humid, then no, you can't really store it. You should just use a small bottle, use as much of it as possible, and dispose of it. And that brings me to another point. Your old fluid that you've just bled through that's fully waterlogged, you should treat that as a hazardous chemical and dispose of it the same as you do your old sump oil at a recycling centre or something, because that's pretty dangerous. Shouldn't have it hanging around, and you know that. And finally, I'll leave links below in the description to this oil and brake fluid syringe and this wonderful little brake fluid tester. It's a fantastic little tool, and it will mean you'll always be able to check in a moment where your brake fluid is and whether or not it needs changing. And brakes are a safety issue, so why wouldn't you want that? I'll leave links to all these below. I'll thank you for watching. Take it easy, ride safe. See you next time.